Hello and welcome everyone here to Spirit of Truth Church, Spirit of Truth Outreach for this episode of Cleaning House, where we are diving into the feasts of Israel, specifically the Feast of Purim. And I'm very excited. Purim is a fun one. Purim is, I got to attend a Purim service, Messianic Jewish Purim service live. And it was a treat like no other, and I do mean treat. There was a number of very tasty pastries and baked goods and things to enjoy. It's a happy celebrational feast. It's not one of the Mosaic feasts. This kind of gets into our two post-Mosaic feasts, the other one being Hanukkah, which celebrates the Maccabees and the situations of regaining Israel. But the Feast of Purim is what we're talking about today. So let's go ahead and jump right in to this fun and fanciful feast, also known as the Feast of Lots. Now, this feast was inaugurated in the book of Esther, and essentially it really is about Esther and the story of the salvation of the Jewish people. Now, Pur means lot, and Purim means lots. So it is literally, Purim, the Feast of Lots. And it's based off of Esther 9:24. So let's go ahead and read that now. Esther 9:24 states, "For Haman, son of Hammedatha, the Agite, the enemy of all the Jews, had plotted against the Jews to destroy them. He cast the Pur, that is the lot, to crush and destroy them." Now, what's fascinating is, again, the Feast of Purim, you think, oh, wait, it's the lot. Well, the lot he cast against them was essentially going to be what was going to destroy him in the end. And we're going to read about this, how essentially, though the king could reverse the decree that the Jews could be fought without penalty, he essentially said, we'll make a counter decree, and we're going to have the Jews be able to defend themselves, and it basically ended in a wholesale slaughter of the enemy in that point. So, this is also called Mordecai's Day, Mordecai being sort of the overseer of Esther and very key in the story in honor of Mordecai. And again, this is found in 2 Maccabees 15:36, but also Esther 9:20 through 21. So let's go ahead and read that as well. Mordecai recorded these events and sent letters to all the Jews in all of King Ahasuerus' provinces, both near and far. He ordered them to celebrate the 14th and 15th days of the month of Adar every year, because during those days the Jews got rid of their enemies. And so, again, that was the month their sorrow was turned into rejoicing and their mourning into a holiday. There were to be days of feasting, rejoicing, and of sending of gifts to one another and the poor. So, again, very celebratory there. Now, it's also known in Arabic as Eid el-Sukkar for the sweet festival or the sugar festival. And during the Turkish period, it was given this name. And at this point, the Jews gave sugar candies to Muslim authorities on this day. Again, it's sort of a day of celebration. Okay. So what is Purim in scriptures? Well, again, we've got to take a look at Esther 9:15 through 19, the origin of the feast. The Jews in Susa assembled again on the 14th day of the month of Adar and killed 300 men in Susa, but they did not seize any plunder. The rest of the Jews in the royal provinces assembled, defended themselves, and got rid of the enemies. They killed 75,000 of those who hated them, but they did not seize any plunder. They fought on the 13th day of the month of Adar and rested on the 14th, and it became a day of fasting and rejoicing. But the Jews in Susa had assembled on the 13th and 14th days of the month. They rested on the 15th day of the month, and it became a day of feasting and rejoicing. And this explains why the rural Jews who live in the villages observe the 14th day of the month of Adar as a time of rejoicing and feasting. It is a holiday when they send gifts to one another. The others celebrate the 15th. So again, the plot was by Haman. He was the vizier of King Ahasuerus, and he was said he wanted to kill the Jews. And on the 13th of Adar, it was set for their destruction. But they were allowed to defend themselves, and then they had a day of feasting afterward. It was a day of gladness rather than sorrow. It was a day of feasting rather than fasting. It was a good day rather than a day of mourning, for the Jews were delivered. They sent portions to one another rather than having portions taken away from them. And then we have the letters of Mordecai being sent out, as I read earlier, in Esther 9:20 through 22. Mordecai recorded these events and sent letters to all the Jews in all of King Ahasuerus' provinces, both near and far. He ordered them to celebrate the 14th and 15th days of the month of Adar every year, because during those days, Jews got rid of their enemies. That was the month when their sorrow was turned into rejoicing and their mourning into a holiday. There were to be days of feasting, rejoicing, and of sending gifts to one another and the poor. So again, Mordecai is going to send news of these good things to the Jews near and far. The feast is to be celebrated because the Jews had rest from their enemies on these days. And then other things similar to what I had said earlier. So let's take a look at the observance by the Jews in Esther 9:23-25. So the Jews agreed to continue the practice they had begun, as Mordecai had written them to do. For Haman, son of Hammedatha, the Agite, the enemy of all the Jews, had plotted against the Jews to destroy them. He cast the pur, that is the lot, to crush and destroy them. But when the matter was brought before the king, he commanded by letter that the evil plan Haman had devised against the Jews return on his own head, and that he should be hanged with his sons on the gallows. Okay? So again, the first observance of Purim was spontaneous. People just celebrated afterward. But then this was essentially committed to an actual holiday. And I would argue that this is God setting up the holiday of Purim in the literal historical background of this. Okay, so let's go ahead and take a look at the naming of the feast. For this reason, these days are called Purim, from the word pur. Because all the instructions in this letter, as well as what they had witnessed and what had happened to them, the Jews bound themselves, their descendants, and all who joined with them to commit, that they would not fail to celebrate these 2 days each and every year, according to the written instructions and according to the time appointed. So again, we have this pur becoming a symbol of God's using circumstances to deliver his own. And again, and here we see these three groups. There's the people who were saved in this generation who celebrated it, their seed or the Jewish descendants, and then those who joined them. Gentile converts to Judaism were also to celebrate Purim. Okay. And then in 29-32, we have the letters of Mordecai and Esther. Queen Esther, daughter of Abihail, along with Mordecai the Jew, wrote this second letter with full authority to confirm the letter about Purim. He sent letters with messages of peace and faithfulness to all the Jews who were in the 127 provinces of the kingdom of Ahasuerus, in order to confirm these days of Purim at their proper time, just as Mordecai, the Jew, and Queen Esther had established them, and just as they had committed themselves and their descendants to the practices of fasting and lamentation. So Esther's command confirmed these customs of Purim, which were then written into the record. So again, you have the confirmation of Purim through Mordecai and Esther. All Jews, all 127 provinces, all of them conform, and there are two traditions that confirm this. The decree by Mordecai and Queen Esther, and then they had established for themselves and their descendants the times of their fasting and lamentations. So in conclusion on this, the name of the feast, which is based again on Haman's actions, he cast the pur to determine on the day he would destroy the Jews, and the feast is again observed because of his failure, because of God's deliverance. And in villages and unwalled towns, they celebrate on the 14th as per those in the villages, and then in walled cities, they celebrate on the 15th. And there are 5 basic elements in the observation. Again, it's to be a day of feasting in place of fasting. It's a day of gladness in place of sorrow. It's a good day in place of mourning. And it's a day of giving portions in place of portions becoming a spoil. And it's a day of giving gifts to the poor instead of having nothing to give. So again, very celebratory. Now, there's some Messianic implications. They're not super strong, but there are a couple of things to note. First is the principle of the Abrahamic covenant. Him that curses you, I will curse. Him that blesses you, I will bless. Okay, that's coming true in this in Esther and in Purim. And then there's also this one. I think this is the stronger one. It's the promise of the Jewish survival throughout the times of the Gentiles. So, a lot of people would argue, no, the Jews have been displaced, or Israel, the new Israel's the church, and all this kind of stuff. But here's the real truth of it. In the middle of the exile, when God really had forsaken the Jewish people in the sense of the promised land, kicked them out, written them a certificate of divorce kind of stuff, he saved them and preserved them. And that is key. That is key to understanding Purim. I would argue it is God's promise echoing throughout history that he is not done with the Jewish people. The Jewish people are still his covenant people. They are still the people of promise. And God has a plan to restore them to the land and restore them spiritually. And I think this is very clear throughout the Old Testament. It's very clear in the Feast of Purim. Again, Feast of Purim in Judaism. Let's go ahead and talk a little bit about that. So what are some of these rabbinic traditions and laws? Well, sometimes they observe the fast of Esther beforehand. It's kind of a fun aspect of this. You have the reading of the Megillah, which is the scroll of Esther. You have the reading of the Torah, specifically Exodus 17:8 through 16. And again, tradition is that Haman was the descendant of King Agag, the reason for this reading, and the king of the Amalekites in the days of Saul. So you kind of get that in there too. So there's additions to synagogue service. You've got, again, the reading of the Purim story, sending of portions to one another. So usually you would give 2 types of food to one friend. Some would give gifts to the poor, like it said in Esther 9:22. Eulogies and fasting was forbidden. It was forbidden to deliver a funeral address or a fast on the 14th and 15th. And you were essentially obligated to drink, eat, and be merry. It's kind of fun. The Shushan Purim is the day after Purim, and propitiatory prayers were not said, and fasting is, again, forbidden then as well. It's customary to, again, make a feast and rejoice. So you kind of get this 2-day celebration thing. Purim foods, you have the Hamantashen. It's a triangular pastry, a sugar cookie, Haman's hat, Haman's ears. They called it a bunch of different things. Made of poppy seeds, prunes, jam, chocolate chips, and nuts. They're very delicious. We had some of these in the Purim festival that we went to. It was a blast. The kreplach, the Jewish ravioli, also delicious, triangular with chopped meat. And you'd often serve beans and turkey and kilich, which is challah bread, chickpeas and fava beans. And Esther maintained a vegan diet in order to avoid breaking kosher laws. That's another piece of this too as well. But again, a lot of delicious, fun foods. You also have Purim plays, pranks, and parodies, and these are a lot of these during the service that we went to. They call them spiels in Yiddish. And you have like the rabbi, the king, the wicked person, and the good queen. Those are parts to play. Typically, whenever Haman shows up, you can kind of boo him. That's a big common one. You provide opportunities for the crowd to cheer the heroes and to boo the villain. There's merrymaking throughout. You have the burning of Haman in effigy, literally. The beating of Haman. You kind of whack whoever's playing Haman with some foam sticks and stuff like that. You have the wearing of masks that portray various characters found in the Megillah. A lot of people dress up. It's like a huge dress-up holiday kind of thing as well. It's very carnival style. And you have parodies of the Jewish Talmud, synagogue, and scriptures even. They do a lot of parody type stuff too. Other Purim laws and customs and oddities, it was permissible but not proper to do work, and you'd typically wear finer clothing. But again, I mean, you'd also dress up in costumes and stuff. And I want to go ahead, again, this is a short talk tonight. Purim, it's a short talk. But I do want to read, there's an interesting Nazi link to this, which I would like to read on page 313 of, again, the Feast of Israel book. And I thought it was a fascinating observance here. Okay, it comes from a final word on the book of Esther. Readers interested in history may find the following 2 facts of value, Fruchtenbaum goes on to say. First, the Jewish Women's Zionist organization, Hadassah, was founded on Purim and named after Esther's Hebrew name in the year of 1912. Second, in 1938, the Nazis banned all Purim observances in Germany and forbade the reading of the Book of Esther. Fascinating, right? A year later, Julius Streicher, the founder and publisher of the virulently anti-Semitic newspaper Der Strömer, explained, just as the Jews butchered 75,000 Persians in one night, the same fate would have befallen the German people had the Jews succeeded in inciting war against Germany. The Jews would have instituted a new Purim festival in Germany. Then, on January 30th, 1944, Adolf Hitler gave a speech primarily addressing his British enemies. Because he had made projections as to what Germany's defeat would mean for the future of the United States, the speech was translated into English and published by the New York Times in full the next day. An excerpt was read as follows. If Germany does not win, the fate of the states in the North, Central, and South America will be decided within a few months. The West would shortly follow. 10 years, the oldest civilized continent would have lost the characteristic features of its life. The picture so dear to us, of us all, of a more than 2,500-year-old cultural and material development would have been erased. Meanwhile, the devastating Jewish Ahasuerus or Xerxes could celebrate the destruction of Europe in a second triumphant Purim festival. In other words, if the Nazis went down to defeat, the Jews would celebrate a second Purim. Interesting. How right Hitler was. On October 16th, 1946, 10 Nazis were hung in Nuremberg, suffering the same fate as the 10 sons of Haman. One of them was Julius Streicher, who said as he was hung, Purim Feast, 1946. He probably didn't realize that Purim celebrates not the hanging of his predecessor Haman, but the saving of the Jewish people. And I firmly do think, again, any salvation of the Jewish people from this type of massive persecution like in the Holocaust it harkens right back to Purim. It harkens right back to Purim. And so it is an important holiday. I know this is a shorter talk. It is an important holiday. It is a holiday which is celebrating God's salvation of the Jewish people. I believe it is looking forward to the ultimate Purim, so to speak, which is going to be the defeat of the Antichrist at the end of the tribulation, when the Jewish people are saved literally and brought back to the land. It is the national and spiritual restoration. I think it's pointing to all of these things. And so next week, we're going to dive into Hanukkah. It'll be a little bit longer than this one, but we're going to dive into Hanukkah. I hope you enjoyed this short presentation on Purim, and I also hope you have a wonderful evening. Thank you so much for joining us here at Spirit of Truth Outreach. Have a wonderful rest of your day.